Scene 6, Circus Train. Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Batman Returns for the Super Nintendo. In the last part we continued on through these stages and ended off right after the scene where the Penguin pushes the Ice Queen off the ledge, framing Batman, even though really there was no way aside from seeing Batman at the top of the building that the citizens could have known that Batman may have done it. The film is very weird sometimes. And this is, not gonna lie, a pretty straightforward stage. We're on the train for most of it here. And they're just gonna be throwing a lot of standard enemies at us throughout it. About a third of the way through the train section we get something new added, but for the most part, it's like most beat-em-up stages and it's just a barrage of enemies. Though it has one of my favorite songs in the game. It's not my favorite song, that's the theme for stage 7. But anything that's more or less a complete riff on the Elfman Batman theme, I just love. Now, something I was looking up in between parts was actually speedruns for this game. And there are two major categories for the speedruns with this one. Easy percent and mania percent. Self-explanatorily, they're just runs on the game on different difficulties. But there's not that much of a difference between the speedrun in terms of time. Because first place on both, I think, belongs to a runner known as L-Rock. And easy percent's record is just under 23 minutes. Mania percent just under 24. Less than a minute, basically. And that's impressive to me. This is where the stage can kind of be annoying, just because I swear these bikers try to aim for where you are, not where you were. And then other times it doesn't seem like it. The dynamite's the biggest issue, and that can do some decent damage, but at least thankfully, you can either abuse invincibility frames for trying to like grapple enemies and throw them down, or have the dynamite injure enemies outright. I also think this is the last time we see the biker enemies, which is weird because I think in the movie they only appeared in that first scene where Batman's in the Batmobile and such. Same with the flame clown type enemy. I think the thin clowns were the ones that showed up through most of the film. If I'm recalling correctly, even. I want to say they may have only even shown up in like the first third of the movie, roughly. It's been a while since I saw the movie, I admit. In fact, I think now I think about it, I think the Strong Man may have shown up in the climax. But you never really completely memorize mooks in film. Like, when I think of generic foot soldiers in films, they're the ones that usually that get turned into boss fights that stick in my mind. Like, in Raiders of the Lost Ark, the Strong Man near the Nazi plane. That guy became a boss fight in more or less any adaptation of that beat, Lego or otherwise. Same, I think, with maybe the sword guy, if he wasn't a cutscene. This portion of the stage has something a bit different. There's occasional barricades you need to jump over, and those will hurt you. They will not kill you, though. They kill most of the enemies, though, in one shot, if they're not smart enough to jump over them, and they do eventually become that smart. It takes maybe 2 or 3 waves of enemies, though. Fire clowns are actually one of the more annoying standard varieties of enemies in the game. Mostly just because they can pull out their fire blow attack with almost no wind-up, especially on this difficulty. And because of that, you can very easily get trapped into attack by them. It's a very similar problem to what the sword swallowers have with how little wind-up their sword swing has. Standard enemies actually make up a good amount of the game, and that's, I think, where most of the time save comes from in the speedruns, because instead of just, like, doing the outright combos or throwing most of them, I think most speedrunners do most of the standard combo, like the 2 standard punches and the 3rd punch, but they don't do the kick, because if you time it right, you can apparently just endlessly combo enemies with that, and you can also, if you do things correctly on, like, the early Catwoman fight, just stun lock them with like your standard punch attack over and over again. I will take that health because I don't want to get a game over yet. When I'm playing this game on hard mode, I actually usually do get a game over somewhere along the line. In fact, I think the only difficulties I can beat this game without a game over on are normal and below. But now it's time for kind of a random boss fight, the Organ Grinder. The annoying thing about this guy is that he has an attack he can not exactly pull out of nowhere, but he'll actively run away from you to use it. Where he'll run to the opposite side of the screen from where you are, put down his little organ, and pop out a machine gun. Thankfully, he can't move vertically with it, but you might want to watch out for that. Thankfully, the bullets can also hurt enemies, and that is helpful, but if you want to avoid it, you actually want to generally stick to one extreme of the screen, like the far left on top and such, and just go higher or lower than him, and grab him to just do some damage. Test tubes are also useful to knock him out of that, just in case you're in a point where you're probably going to get hit by it. Honestly, though, comparatively, I think he's in a bit of an odd place boss-wise, because him and the Strongman in particular come at a point where they make sense, because I think that's where these characters may have been in the movie, if I'm recalling correctly. Don't quote me on that, though. It's been a few years since I last saw the film. But gameplay design-wise, I feel like most of the end bosses should be outright story-related. Like, maybe put Max Shrek in there as a boss fight of some sort, maybe. Make him like Mr. X in the one Streets of Rage. After stopping the circus train, Batman heads for the Penguin's hideout. Arctic World at the old Gotham Zoo. Finally, the Penguin will pay for his treachery. And now it's time for my favorite stage theme in the game. Scene 7, the Penguin's Lair. The theme here is more or less just a kick-ass version of the 89 Batman theme, and as I mentioned before, I love this song. Danny Elfman's made some really good music over his career, but for the Batman 89 theme's probably my overall favorite of anything he's done. And this stage is sort of the game in review in a lot of ways, because we go through waves of enemies almost in the order that they were introduced throughout the game. There's a lot of them, and this can be a bit of a troublesome stage, especially if you're low on lives. Thankfully, if you've gotten this far, taking out these enemies shouldn't be too bad. It's only when you get to, like, the sword swallowers and the knife throwers that things are probably going to get annoying. But at the end of the day, unless you're playing on Mania mode, where enemies obviously have way too much health for their own good at times, if you've gotten this far, you're probably going to do fine. I think the only enemy that doesn't really have their health change too much at all, depending on the difficulty, is the biker. Because the one Batarang always takes them out. And I might be specially coded into them because they're on a bike, getting hit in the head, and will obviously probably disorient you enough to fall off the bike. But oh well. It's just kind of one of those things. However, don't expect this stage to be very bluntly straightforward. There's still going to be something happening along the way in a few moments. But it is, more so than any of the other stages from memory, an outright enemy rush, because there's not even a 2D section here. The last 2D section was the second one in stage 4. Which is probably why that stage actually has 2 of them, so they can get the last ones out of the way. Either way, time for the weirdest plot point from the film. Penguin trained his penguins to have missiles on their back for some reason. Batman Returns, I love you, but you can be a bizarre movie. Which, mind you, suitable. Comic books, I think, need some degree of madness to not keep things fun, but I guess to keep the reality both there and not, in a way. Because comic books have always been about reality and the issues that people face and how people go against them. But I think adding that extra layer of just, not silliness, but craziness helps differentiate just a little bit. It's part of the reason why I actually prefer some of the a lot of the Marvel movies to DC's films, because DC's films, I think, keep it just a little bit too serious. Not to say they haven't had their fun in the past, despite me not liking the Justice League film. I thought it had a much better approach in terms of its writing style compared to some of the other ones. Not to decry the Zack Snyder stuff, but no, I'm just not a fan. Part of the reason I liked Batman 89 and Batman Returns, and to an extent Batman Forever, they at least at the same time tried to have some fun with themselves. Batman and Robin, though, I should mention the Penguin rockets, they're kind of odd in that, and obviously I haven't played this game as much as some other people have, so I probably just don't have the knowledge for it. But I think some of them directly home in on Batman, whereas others are completely position-based. It might have to do with maybe what side of the screen they're being fired from. If they're being fired from the background, maybe their position's set, but if they're not, maybe they're aiming directly for Batman. But it is important to note that whenever missiles are being fired, you should probably just pick a corner and guard just to be safe. Because that's just probably the best way that you can avoid most damage. Keeping moving is a thing, yeah, but if, say, one is position-based, you might just walk right into its explosion radius. Beat-em-ups are a bit odd for me because even compared to some other styles of game, there's not many ways you can really play them, you know what I mean? Aside from maybe like each character's differing stats if they have more than one character available, say like Streets of Rage or Final Fight, there's only really still one way you can play the game. There's not really a way you can play more conservatively unless you're low on HP or you're just trying to stay away from enemies. Aggressively, I guess, is a playstyle, but you're encouraged to play that way through most of them anyway and such. At least compared to, like, say, platformers where you're maybe a more slower methodical type or you like to rush through things. Because there's not really much else you can do in a lot of these kind of games. And mind you, I guess that's the point of them. Especially a lot of these are styled after arcade beat-em-ups where the entire point is to be hard and eat up your money while at the same time being fun enough that you'll want to keep playing. And right there's the last health item in the game, so make sure you grab it. And of course, the last enemy rush is a lot of my two least favorite enemy types. I have a lot of trouble telling whether or not I dislike knife throwers or sword swallowers more, because knife throwers have actually a bit more range than the sword swallowers because they can throw their knives, but you can outright easily dodge one of those just by moving vertically. Sword swallowers can just throw themselves out with their sword strikes more randomly. Actually, I guess I just decided whether or not I like the knife throwers less or more, huh? Thankfully, at the end of the day, throwing makes everything quite a bit easier. I think the sword swallowers also try to do their standard sword swing when you're at just a distance that if you're walking, you'll probably walk right into it. Because that just feels like something that the game is trying to do to me. At the end of the day, though, if you've gotten this far, and hopefully you have some extra lives still and an extra continue, you should be just fine. And now it's time for the final gauntlet. First part of the final boss is a 2D boss fight against this duck boat thing that Penguin had in the movie for some reason. They never really explained how he got it. I just assumed it was a thing from Arctic World. Oh, and there's game over number 2. Penguin in his duck boat has technically 3 attacks. 2 of them are more or less the same thing. The duck boat can rise, I guess duck vehicle, can rise itself up and slam down like that. He likes to do that in 2 different ways. Either keep himself up to the point where you're supposed to go under him and just get to the other side, or ones like that where he just tries to slam in on you. Then the penguins on the back can fire missiles at you, which just kind of rain all across the screen. It sounds pretty easy. In fact, honestly, it is one of the easiest bosses in the game, even with the amount of HP it gets. But the amount of damage it does isn't that substantial. Even though sometimes dodging the attack where you have to go underneath it, or in the case you need to walk underneath it like this, can be a bit strict. On the whole, 2D mode boss fights, pretty simple in comparison to the 3D style fighting. Speaking of which, time for the actual final boss against the penguin in this place where Shrek got absolutely zapped in the movie. Penguin has 3 or 4 attacks. 2 of them are more or less a variation of the same one, involving where he's machine gun firing out of his umbrella. He can either be stationary when he's doing it, or move up and down. On the whole, though, as long as you get above or below him, you can just grab him and do some extra damage. The other 2 attacks are related to him on his umbrella. Aside from just being damaging whenever he's moving with the umbrella like that, especially when he has the after image, he can go off screen and then fly back on screen from the top or from the higher portions of the screen and try to dive bomb you. That's actually the point I recommend you use your test tubes if you have any, just because you can knock him out of the umbrella like that. And otherwise, I think he still attacks his umbrella standardly when he's flying around. When he doesn't have an after image when he's flying around is when you're supposed to hit him with that. And the best way to do that is honestly with jump attacks, which is kind of inverse of how you should do it when you're on the ground. Because if you do a jump attack with him when he's on the ground, he's likely to counter with his own jump attack that is very likely to hit you. kind of like does his own little grapple move. In a way, he's actually kind of an inverse Batman with his fighting style. If you've gotten this far, though, you shouldn't have too many issues. This is actually probably the one boss that doesn't get that much harder aside from the damage increase on Mania mode. But that damage increase is notable. It's not as ridiculous as Catwoman's because, my god, that whip attack, but it's still worth being afraid of. Oh yeah, he can also toss his umbrellas down at the ground to explode, just like in the earlier boss fight against him in the 2D section. But, ow. That is game. Haha! Take that, Danny DeVito! See you in Philadelphia. At last, Batman has defeated the Penguin. Peace has returned. Until the next time, the dark forces rise to harm the fair people of Gotham City. You know, that reveal doesn't exactly have the same powers it does in the movie when we don't see Catwoman supposedly die, right, game? Yeah, it's weird. They mention Max Schreck at the beginning of the game during, like, the first two stages, but then we never see the guy, or he's hardly mentioned there from there on. Which is kind of strange, given the fact that, aside from the Penguin's own plans, he's more or less the major driving factor of the film's villainry. In fact, he's the reason Catwoman even exists. It's weird. By the way, that's Batman Returns. It's a really good beat-em-up. It's monotonous like most of them are, but that kind of monotony is a good kind. It keeps things interesting enough with some of its stage layouts and such, but I should note, difficulty-wise, I recommend sticking with normal or hard mode. Special and Mania mode, you take way too much damage for your own good, and the enemy HP increases are just ridiculous at times. You do get different ending images, like most beat-em-ups or arcade-style games at the time, depending on your difficulty. There's only 4, though. There's not one for each difficulty. If I'm recalling correctly, there's one for easy and normal, which is Catwoman, one for hard and special, which is the Penguin, and then we're gonna see the one we got for Mania mode in a moment or so. I would recommend the game, but there are probably better beat-em-ups for you out there. The one thing I think that this game has over those is the fantastic arrangement of Danny Elfman's score. This game's soundtrack is amazing. Not many movie soundtracks get this kind of treatment, and it's kind of strange to see that, but I recommend looking it up. It's really good. Also, I can't actually do anything at this screen while we're waiting for the image. We actually have to wait for the music to end, which is a good theme. The credits theme also is really good. But let's see what we got for beating the game on Mania. You are the true Dark Knight. Not gonna lie, despite being an obvious cutout from the movie, that looks really good for Super Nintendo standards. Got a lot of detail on there. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next Let's Play, whatever that may be. See you guys then.